one's desires, they rapidly build up and become compulsions. If everyone had a particular time and place for the purpose of periodically indulging in their personal desires, without fear of embarrassment or reproach, they would be sufficiently released to lead unfrustrated lives in the everyday world. They would be free to plunge headlong into whatever undertaking they might choose instead of going about their duties half-heartedly, their creative urges frustrated by denying their natural desires. This would apply in the majority of cases, but there will always be those who work better under pressure. Generally, those who need to endure a certain amount of hardship to produce to their full capabilities are in basically artistic vocations. More will be said later about fulfillment through self-denial. This does not mean to imply that all artists fit into this category. On the contrary, many artists are unable to produce unless their basic animal needs have been satisfied. For the most part, it is not the artist or individualist, but the average middle-class working man or woman who is lacking the proper release for their desires. It is ironic that the responsible, respectable person, the one who pays society's bills, should be the one given the least in return. It is he who must be ever conscious of his moral obligations and who is condemned for normally indulging in his natural desires. The Satanic religion considers this a gross injustice. He who upholds his responsibilities should be most entitled to the pleasures of his choice, without censure from the society he serves. Finally, a religion, Satanism, has been formed which commends and rewards those who support the society in which they live, instead of denouncing them for their human needs. From every set of principles, be it religious, political, or philosophical, some good can be extracted. Amidst the madness of the Hitlerian concept, one point stands out as a shining example of this: strength through joy. Hitler was no fool when he offered the German people happiness on a personal level to ensure their loyalty to him and peak efficiency from them. It has been clearly established that the majority of all illnesses are of a psychosomatic nature, and that psychosomatic illnesses are a direct result of frustration. It has been said that the good die young. The good, by Christian standards, do die young. It is the frustration of our natural instincts which leads to the deterioration of our minds and bodies. It has become very fashionable to concentrate on the betterment of the mind and spirit, and to consider giving pleasure to one's body the very shell without which the mind and spirit could not exist, to be coarse, crude, unrefined. As of late, most people who deemed themselves emancipated have left normalcy only to transcend into idiocy, by way of bending their behinds around to meet their navels, subsisting on wild and exotic diets like brown rice and tea. They feel they will arrive at a great state of spiritual development. Hogwash, says the Satanist. He would rather eat a good hearty meal, to exercise his imagination, and transcend by means of physical and emotional fulfillment. It seems to the Satanist that after being harnessed with unreasonable religious demands for so many centuries, one would welcome the chance to be human for once. If anyone thinks that by denying his natural desires he can avoid mediocrity, he should examine the Eastern mystical beliefs which have been in great intellectual favor in recent years. Christianity is old hat, so those who wish to escape its fetters have turned to so-called enlightened religions, such as Buddhism. Although Christianity is certainly deserving of the criticism it has received, perhaps it has been taking more than its share of the blame. The followers of the mystical beliefs are every bit as guilty of the little humanisms as the misguided Christians. Both religions are based on tried philosophies, but the mystical religionists profess to be enlightened and emancipated from the guilt-ridden dogma which is typified by Christianity. However, the Eastern mystic is even more preoccupied than the Christian with avoiding animalistic actions that remind him he is not a sane but merely a man, only another form of animal, sometimes better, more often worse, than those who walk on all fours, and who, reckless of his divine spiritual and intellectual development, has become the most vicious animal of all. The Satanist asks, what is wrong with being human, and having human limitations as well as assets? By denying his desires, the mystic has come no closer to overcoming compulsion than his kindred soul, the Christian. The Eastern mystical beliefs have taught people to contemplate their navels, stand on their heads, stare at blank walls, avoid the use of labels in life, and discipline themselves against any desire for materialistic pleasure. Nevertheless, I am sure you have seen just as many so-called disciplined yogis with the inability to control a smoking habit as anyone else, or just as many supposedly emancipated Buddhists become just as excited as a less aware person when they are confronted with a member of the opposite, or in some cases, same sex. Yet when asked to explain the reason for their hypocrisy, these people retreat into the ambiguousness which characterizes their faith. No one can pin them down if there are no straight answers that can be given. The simple fact of the matter is that the very thing which has led this type of person to a faith which preaches abstinence is indulgence. Their compulsive masochism is the reason for choosing a religion which not only advocates self-denial, but praises them for it, and gives them the sacrosanct avenue of expression for their masochistic needs. The more abuse they can stand, the holier they become. Masochism, to most people, represents a rejection of indulgence. Satanism points out many meanings behind the meanings, and considers masochism to be an indulgence if any attempt to sway or change the person from his masochistic traits is met with resentment and or failure. The Satanist does not condemn these people for giving vent to their masochistic desires, but he does feel the utmost contempt towards those who cannot be honest enough, at least with themselves, to face and accept their masochism as a natural part of their personality makeup. Having to use religion as an excuse for their masochism is bad enough, but these people actually have the effrontery to feel superior to those who are not bound up in self-deceitful expression of their fetishes. These people would be the first to condemn a man who found his weekly release with a person who would beat him soundly, thereby releasing himself from the very thing which could, if unreleased, make him, as they are, a compulsive church-goer or religious fanatic. By finding adequate release for his masochistic desires, he no longer needs to debase and deny himself in his every waking moment, as do these compulsive masochists. Satanists are encouraged to indulge in the 7 deadly sins, as they need hurt no one. They were only invented by the Christian Church to ensure guilt on the part of its followers. The Christian Church knows that it is impossible for anyone to avoid committing these sins, as they are all things which we, being human, most naturally do. After inevitably committing these sins, financial offerings to the church in order to pay off God are employed as a sop to the parishioner's conscience. Satan has never needed a book of rules, because vital natural forces have kept man sinful and intent on preserving himself and his feelings. Nevertheless, demoralizing attempts have been made on his body and being for his soul's sake, which only illustrate how misconceived and misused the labels of indulgence versus compulsion have become. Sexual activity certainly is condoned and encouraged by Satanism, but obviously the fact that it is the only religion which honestly takes this stand is the reason it has been traditionally given so much literary space. Naturally, if most people belong to the religions which repress them sexually, anything written on this provocative subject is going to make for titillating reading. If all attempts to sell something, be it a product or an idea, have failed, sex will always sell it. The reason for this is that even though people now consciously accept sex as a normal and necessary function, their subconscious is still bound by the taboo which religion has placed upon it. So, again, what is denied is more intensely desired. It is this bugaboo regarding sex which causes the literature devoted to the Satanic views on the subject to overshadow all else written about Satanism. The true Satanist is not mastered by sex any more than he is mastered by any of his other desires. As with all other pleasurable things, the Satanist is master of, rather than mastered by, sex. He is not the perverted fiend who is just waiting for the opportunity to deflower every young virgin, nor is he the skulking degenerate who furtively hangs around in the dirty bookstores, slavering over the nasty pictures. If pornography fills his needs for the moment, he unashamedly buys some choice items and guiltlessly peruses them at his leisure. We have to accept the fact that man has become disgruntled at being constantly repressed, but we must do everything we can to at least temper the sinful desires of man, lest they run rampant in this new age, say the religionists of the right-hand path to the questioning Satanist. Why continue to think of these desires as shameful and something to be repressed? If you now admit they are natural, returns the Satanist, could it be that the white light religionists are a bit sour grapes about the fact that they didn't think of a religion before the Satanists, which would be enjoyable to follow, and if the truth were known, would they too not like to have a bit more pleasure out of life, but for fear of losing face, cannot admit it? Could it also be that they are afraid people will, after hearing about Satanism, tell themselves, "This is for me, why should I continue with a religion which condemns me for everything I do, even though there is nothing actually wrong with it?" The Satanist thinks this is more than likely true. There is certainly much evidence that past religions are, every day, lifting more and more of their ridiculous restrictions. Even so, when an entire religion is based on abstinence instead of indulgence as it should be, there is little left when it has been revised to meet the current needs of man. So, Why waste time buying oats for a dead horse? The watchword of Satanism is indulgence instead of abstinence. But it is not compulsion. On the choice of the human sacrifice. The supposed purpose in performing the ritual of sacrifice is to throw the energy provided by the blood of the freshly slaughtered victim into the atmosphere of the magical working, thereby intensifying the magician's chances of success. The white magician assumes that since blood represents the life force, there is no better way to appease the gods or demons than to present them with suitable quantities of it. Combine this rationale with the fact that a dying creature is expending an overabundance of adrenal and other biochemical energies, and you have what appears to be an unbeatable combination. The white magician, wary of the consequences involved in the killing of a human being, naturally utilizes birds or other lower creatures in his ceremonies. It seems these sanctimonious wretches feel no guilt in the taking of a non-human life, as opposed to a human's. The fact of the matter is that if the magician is worthy of his name, he will be uninhibited enough to release the necessary force from his own body, instead of from an unwilling and undeserving victim. Contrary to all established magical theory, the release of this force is not effected in the actual spilling of blood, but in the death throes of the living creature. This discharge of bioelectrical energy is the very same phenomenon which occurs during any profound heightening of the emotions, such as sexual orgasm, blind anger, mortal terror, consuming grief, etc. Of these emotions, the easiest entered into of one's own violation are sexual orgasm and anger, with grief running a close third, remembering that the two most readily available of these three, sexual orgasm and anger, have been burned into man's unconscious as sinful by religionists. It is small wonder they are shunned by the white magician, who plods along carrying the greatest of all millstones of guilt, the inhibitive and asinine absurdity in the need to kill an innocent living creature at the high point of a ritual, as practiced by erstwhile wizards, is obviously their lesser of the evils. When a discharge of energy is called for, these poor conscience-stricken fools, who have been calling themselves witches and warlocks, would sooner chop the head off a goat or chicken in an attempt to harness its death agony, than have the blasphemous bravery to masturbate in full view of the Jehovah whom they claim to deny. The only way these mystical cowards can ritualistically release themselves is through the agony of another's death, actually their own, by proxy rather than the indulgent force which produces life. The treaders of the path of white light are truly the cold and the dead. No wonder these tittering pustules of mystical wisdom must stand within protective circles to bind the evil forces in order to keep themselves safe from attack. One good orgasm would probably kill them. The use of a human sacrifice in a satanic ritual does not imply that the sacrifice is slaughtered to appease the gods. Symbolically, the victim is destroyed through the working of a hex or curse, which in turn leads to the physical, mental or emotional destruction of the sacrifice in ways and means not attributable to the magician. The only time the Satanist would perform the human sacrifice would be if it were to serve the twofold purpose, that being to release the magician's wrath in the throwing of a curse, and more important, to dispose of a totally obnoxious and deserving individual. Under no circumstances would a Satanist sacrifice any animal or baby. For centuries, propagandists of the right-hand path have been prattling over the supposed sacrifices of small children and voluptuous maidens at the hands of diabolists. It would be thought that anyone reading or hearing of these heinous accounts would immediately question their authenticity, taking into consideration the biased sources of these stories. On the contrary, as with all holy lies which are accepted without reservation, this assumed modus operandi of Satanists persists to this day. There are sound and logical reasons why the Satanists could not perform such sacrifices. Man, the animal, is the Godhead to the Satanist. The purest form of carnal existence reposes in the bodies of animals and human children who have not grown old enough to deny themselves their natural desires. They can perceive things that the average adult human can't never hope to. Therefore, the Satanist holds these beings in a sacred regard, knowing he can learn much from these natural magicians of the world. The Satanist is aware of the universal custom of the treader of the path of Agartha, the killing of the god. Inasmuch as gods are always created in man's own image, and the average man hates what he sees in himself, the inevitable must occur, the sacrifice of the god who represents himself. The Satanist does not hate himself, nor the gods he might choose, and has no desire to destroy himself or anything for which he stands. It is for this reason he could never willfully harm an animal or child. The question arises, who, then, would be considered a fit and proper human sacrifice? And how is one qualified to pass judgment on such a person? The answer is brutally simple. Anyone who has unjustly wronged you, one who has gone out of his way to hurt you, to deliberately cause trouble and hardship for you or those dear to you. In short, a person asking to be cursed by their very actions. When a person, by his reprehensible behavior, practically cries out to be destroyed, it is truly your moral obligation to indulge them their wish. The person who takes every opportunity to pick on others is often mistakenly called sadistic. In reality, this person is a misdirected masochist who is working towards his own destruction. The reason the person viciously strikes out against you is because they are afraid of you or what you represent, or are resentful of your happiness. They are weak, insecure, and on extremely shaky ground when you throw your curse, and they make ideal human sacrifices. It is sometimes easy to overlook the actual wrongdoing of the victim of your curse, when one considers how unhappy the person he really is. It is not so easy, though, to retrace the damaging footsteps of your antagonist and make right those practical situations he or she has made wrong. The ideal sacrifice may be emotionally insecure, but nonetheless can, in the machinations of his insecurity, cause severe damage to your tranquility or sound reputation. Mental illness, nervous breakdown, maladjustment, anxiety, neuroses, broken homes, sibling rivalry, etc., etc. Ad infinitum have too long been convenient excuses for vicious and irresponsible actions. Anyone who says we must try to understand those who make life miserable for those undeserving of misery is aiding and abetting a social cancer. The apologists for these rabid humans deserve any clobberings they get at the hands of their charges. Mad dogs are destroyed, and they need help far more than the humans who conveniently made froths at the mouth when irrational behavior is in order. It is easy to say, so what? These people are insecure, so they can't hurt me. But the fact remains, given the opportunity, they would destroy you. Therefore, you have every right to symbolically destroy them, and if your curse provokes their actual annihilation, rejoice that you have been instrumental in ridding the world of a pest. If your success or happiness disturbs the person, you owe him nothing. He is made to be trampled underfoot. If people had to take the consequences of their own actions, they would think twice. Life after death. Through fulfillment of the ego, man is aware that he will die someday. Other animals, when nearing death, know they are about to die, but it is not until death is certain that the animal senses his coming departure from this world, and even then he does not know exactly what is entailed in dying. It is often pointed out that animals accept death gracefully, without fear or resistance. This is a beautiful concept, but one that only holds true in cases where death for the animal is unavoidable. When an animal is sick or injured, he will fight for his life with every ounce of strength he has left. It is this unshakable will to live that, if man were not so highly evolved, would also give him the fighting spirit he needs to stay alive. It is a well-known fact that many people die simply because they give up and just don't care anymore. This is understandable if the person is very ill, with no apparent chance for recovery. But this often is not the case. Man has become lazy. He has learned to take the easy way out. Even suicide has become less repugnant to many people than any number of others. Since religion is totally to blame for this, death, in most religions, is touted as a great spiritual awakening, one which is prepared for throughout life. This concept is very appealing to one who has not had a satisfactory life, but to those who have experienced all the joys life has to offer, there is a great dread attached to dying. This is as it should be. It is this lust for life which will allow the vital person to live on after the inevitable death of his fleshly shell. History shows that men who have given their own lives in pursuit of an ideal have been deified for their martyrdom. Religionists and political leaders have been very crafty in laying their plans. By holding the martyr up as a shining example to his fellow men, they eliminate the common sense reaction that willful self-destruction goes against all animal logic. To the Satanist, martyrdom and non-personalized heroism is to be associated not with integrity, but with stupidity. This, of course, does not apply to the situations which involve the safety of a loved one, but to give one's own life for something as impersonal as a political or religious issue is the ultimate in masochism. Life is the one great indulgence, death the one great abstinence. To a person who is satisfied with his earthly existence, life is like the party, and no one likes to leave a good party. By the same token, if a person is enjoying himself here on earth, he will not so readily give up this life for the promise of an afterlife about which he knows nothing. The Eastern mystical beliefs teach humans to discipline themselves against any conscious will for success, so they might dissolve themselves into universal cosmic awareness. Anything to avoid good healthy self-satisfaction or honest pride in earthly accomplishments. It is interesting to know that the areas in which this type of belief flourishes are those where material gains are not easily obtainable. For this reason, the predominant religious belief must be one which commends its followers for their rejection of material things and their avoidance of the use of labels which attaches a certain amount of importance to material gains. In this way, the people can be pacified into accepting their lot, no matter how small it may be. Satanism uses many labels. If it were not for names, very few of us would understand anything in life, much less attach any significance to it, and significance compels recognition, which is something everyone wants, especially the Eastern mystic who tries to prove to everyone he can meditate longer or stand more deprivation and pain than the next fellow. The Eastern philosophies preach the dissolution of man's ego before he can produce sins. It is unfathomable to the Satanist to conceive of an ego which would willfully choose denial of itself. In countries where this is used as a sop for the willingly impoverished, it is understandable that a philosophy which teaches the denial of the ego would serve a useful purpose, at least for those in power, to whom it would be detrimental if their people were discontented. But for anyone who has every opportunity for material gain, to choose this form of religious thought seems foolish. Indeed, the Eastern mystic believes strongly in reincarnation. To a person who has virtually nothing in this life, the possibility that he may have been a king in a past life or maybe one in the next life is very attractive, and does much to appease his need for self-respect. If there is nothing in which they can take pride in this life, they can console themselves by thinking there are always future lives. That never occurs to the believer in reincarnation that if his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, etc. had developed good karmas by their adherence to the same beliefs and ethics as his present ones, then why is he now living in privation, rather than like a Maharaja? Belief in reincarnation provides a beautiful fantasy world in which a person can find the proper avenue of ego expression, but at the same time claim to have dissolved his ego. This is emphasized by the roles people choose for themselves in their past or future lives. Believers in reincarnation do not always choose an honorable character. If the person is of a highly respectable and conservative nature, he will often choose a colorful rogue or gangster, thereby fulfilling his alter ego. Or, a woman who has much social status may pick a harlot or famous courtesan for the characterization of herself in a past life. If people were able to divorce themselves from the stigma attached to personal ego fulfillment, they would not need to play self-deceitful games such as belief in reincarnation as the means of satisfying their natural need for ego fulfillment. The Satanist believes in complete gratification of his ego. Satanism, in fact, is the only religion which advocates the intensification or encouragement of the ego. Only if a person's own ego is sufficiently fulfilled can he afford to be kind and complimentary to others, without robbing himself of his self-respect. We generally think of a braggart as a person with a large ego. In reality, his bragging results from a need to satisfy his impoverished ego. Religionists have kept their followers in line by suppressing their egos, by making their followers feel inferior. The awesomeness of their God is ensured. Satanism encourages its members to develop a good strong ego because it gives them the self-respect necessary for a vital existence in this life. If a person has been vital throughout his life and has fought to the end for his earthly existence, it is this ego which will refuse to die, even after the expiration of the flesh which housed it. Young children are to be admired for their driving enthusiasm for life. This is exemplified by the small child who refuses to go to bed when there is something exciting going on, and when once put to bed, will sneak down the stairs to peek through the curtain and watch. It is this childlike vitality that will allow the Satanist to peek through the curtain of darkness and death and remain earthbound. Self-sacrifice is not encouraged by the Satanic religion. Therefore, unless death comes as an indulgence because of extreme circumstances which make the termination of life a welcome relief from the unendurable earthile existence, suicide is frowned upon by the Satanic religion. Religious martyrs have taken their own lives, not because life was intolerable for them, but to use their supreme sacrifice as a tool to further the religious belief. We must assume, then, that suicide, if done for the sake of the Church, is condoned and even encouraged, even though their scriptures label it a sin, because religious martyrs of the past have always been deified. It is rather curious that the only time suicide is considered sinful by other religions is when it comes as an indulgence. Religious holidays. The highest of all holidays in the Satanic religion is the date of one's own birth. This is in direct contradiction to the holy of holy days of other religions, which deify a particular God who has been created in an anthropomorphic form of their own image, thereby showing that the ego is not really buried. The Satanist feels, why not really be honest? And if you are going to create a God in your image, why not create the God as yourself? Every man is a God if he chooses to recognize himself as one. So, the Satanist celebrates his own birthday as the most important holiday of the year. After all, aren't you happier about the fact that you were born than you are about the birth of someone you have never even met? Or for that matter, aside from religious holidays, why pay higher tribute to the birthday of a president or to a date in history than we do to the day we were brought into this greatest of all worlds? Despite the fact that some of us may not have been wanted, or at least were not particularly planned, we're glad, even if no one else is, that we're here. You should give yourself a pat on the back, buy yourself whatever you want, treat yourself like the king or god that you are, and generally celebrate your birthday with as much pomp and ceremony as possible. After one's own birthday, the two major Satanic holidays are Walpurgis and Halloween. For All Hallows Eve, Saint Walpurgis, or Walpurga, or Walburga, depending upon the time and area in which one is referring to her, was born in Sussex about the end of the 7th or the beginning of the 8th century, and was educated at Wimborne, Dorset, where after taking the veil, she remained for 25 years. She then, at the instance of her uncle, Saint Boniface, and her brother, Saint Willibald, set out along with some other nuns to found religious houses in Germany. Her first settlement was at Bischofsheim in the Diocese of Mainz, and 2 years later, 754 AD, she became abbess of the Benedictine nunnery at Heidenthum. Within her Brother Weilebalt's diocese of Eichstätt in Bavaria, where another brother, Weinbald, had at the same time also been made head of a monastery. On the death of Weinbald in 760 she succeeded him in his charge, retaining the superintendence of both houses until her death on February 25, 779. Her relics were translated to Eichstätt, where she was laid in a hollow rock, from which exuded the kind of bituminous oil, afterwards known as Walpurgis oil, regarded as having miraculous efficacy against disease. The cave became a place of pilgrimage, and a great church was built over the spot. She is commemorated at various times, but principally on May 1st, her day taking the place of an earlier pagan festival. Amazingly enough, all of this rigmarole was found necessary simply to condone the continuance of the most important pagan festival of the year, the grand climax of the spring equinox. The eve of May has been memorialized as the night that all of the demons, specters, afrits, and banshee would come forth and hold their wild revels, symbolizing the fruition of the spring equinox. Halloween, All Hallows Eve, or All Saints' Day, falls on October 31st or November 1st. Originally, All Hallows Eve was one of the great fire festivals of Britain at the time of the Druids. In Scotland it was associated with the time when the spirits of the dead, the demons, witches, and sorcerers were unusually active and propitious. Paradoxically, All Hallows Eve was also the night when young people performed magical rituals to determine their future marriage partners. The youth of the villages carried on with much merry-making and sensual revelry, but the older people took great care to safeguard their homes from the evil spirits, witches, and demons who had exceptional power that night. The solstices and equinoxes are also celebrated as holidays, as they herald the first day of the seasons. The difference between a solstice and an equinox is a semantic one, defining the relationship between the sun, moon, and the fixed stars. The solstice applies to summer and winter. The equinox refers to autumn and spring. The summer solstice is in June, and the winter solstice is in December. The autumn equinox is in September, and the spring equinox is in March. Both the equinoxes and the solstices vary a day or two from year to year, depending on the lunar cycle at the time, but usually fall on the 21st or 22nd of the month. His desires that rapidly build up and become compulsions. If everyone had a particular time and place for the purpose of periodically indulging in their personal desires, without fear of embarrassment or reproach, they would be sufficiently released to lead unfrustrated lives in the everyday world. They would be free to plunge headlong into whatever undertaking they might choose instead of going about their duties half-heartedly, their creative urges frustrated by denying their natural desires.